of my all-time favorite horror movies is The Exorcist III. Yeah, I prefer the third one over the first one. I get it, that might be a little sacrilegious to some horror fans out there, but I can't help the way I feel, man. The first Exorcist is excellent, and is rightly hailed as a classic. But my love for Exorcist III, aka Legion, goes deep.
And Tuesday night she's cooking as a carp. It's a tasty fish. I have nothing against it. But because it's supposedly filled with impurities, she buys it live. And for 3 days it's been swimming up and down in my bathtub. Up and down. And I hate it. I can't stand the sight of it. Moving its gills. Now you're standing very close to me, Father. Have you noticed? Yes. I haven't had a bath for 3 days. I can't go home until the carp is asleep.
I think it deserves to be held in the same reverence as the first film. With middling to negative reviews and nowhere near the legacy of the original film, allow me to make a case for The Exorcist III, as I believe it is truly a film that deserves more respect! Today's video is sponsored by The Fall of Polite, my debut novel. It's a post-apocalyptic story of survival and revenge set in a freshly lawless New England in the dead of winter. It's out now. You can check the description if you're interested in getting yourself a copy. There's also other videos on this channel that go into more detail on it. Now, spoilers ahead for The Exorcist III. Landing in theaters 17 years after the release of the 1973 classic, The Exorcist III follows a plot that is connected to the events of the first film without ever feeling too much like a direct sequel. There are characters from the first film both seen and mentioned, as well as returning iconography and mythology. But let it be clear that these are two very different films. In fact, the source novel and original screenplay had even less to do with the original Exorcist. And these connections, tenuous as they may be, were only added in at the insistence of producers late into production. The Exorcist II is just completely ignored since William Peter Blatty hated it, and let's just say that's not a problem, so you don't have to watch that one. You can go right from 1 to 3. I mean, it's got a certain entertainment factor to be sure, but it's definitely not a film I'll be championing in this series, let's just say that. The Exorcist III follows George C. Scott as Police Lieutenant Bill Kinderman as he investigates a series of strange, brutal murders that bear the calling cards of a serial killer who was put to death on the electric chair 15 years ago. This serial killer is known as the Gemini Killer and was, as you might guess, inspired by the real-life Zodiac Killer. And speaking of Zodiac, Exorcist III might actually give you flashes of David Fincher's Zodiac, as on top of being a great horror film, it's also an excellent serial killer film, and it holds its own against any psychological thriller among all the greats of that subgenre, like Silence of the Lambs and Seven. The first Exorcist film was directed by William Friedkin, who was at one point attached to direct The Exorcist III as well. But him and William Peter Blatty, author of the source novels and the screenplay to the original film, were constantly at odds with each other. They couldn't agree on the direction to take the material. Blatty ended up writing and directing The Exorcist III himself. John Carpenter almost directed the film as well, before stepping down to let Blatty helm his own script. This was a notoriously messy set, fraught with tension between Blatty and the studio, who demanded frequent changes in cuts and additions. There are actually two drastically different cuts of the film, with the director's cut not being released until 2016. That's 26 years after the theatrical cut. Many thought this director's cut would never get released. There are many differences between the two cuts, the most significant of which being an entirely different, scaled-down ending. The original script had no exorcism whatsoever, to which the producers were like, Blatty, my guy, it's called The Exorcist III, there's gotta be an exorcism. And Blatty was like, fuck you, I wanted to call it Legion, I didn't want to call it Exorcist III. And I mean, think about it from his perspective. They make him change the title to Exorcist III, then they make him put in an exorcism because it is in the title after all. Like, they could have made the title into anything and then forced him to include whatever they wanted to put in the title. I mean, he's fully at their mercy. Whenever there's a story of friction between filmmaker and studio, 99 times out of 100 I gotta side with the filmmaker. But I gotta say, the studio might have been right in this instance, at least partially. This one specific area. I mean, they were definitely wrong about other things in this production, including my only real problem with the film, which is Father Mourning. George C. Scott isn't playing a priest, he's just a cop, which means in order to have an exorcism at the end of the film, a new priest character had to get squeezed into the film, and it's pretty clear that this character was a late addition. To Blatty's credit, I think he handled this as well as he probably could have given the circumstances. He gives this priest a good intro scene, and he went all out with the actual exorcism scene, which is pretty fucking awesome. I mean, look at this.
God.
Bill.
My God!
The only problem with this is that we don't care about Father Morning as a character. This role would hold so much more weight if he were a developed character that we cared about. But that wasn't exactly possible when you take into account that the film was already completely shot, pretty much finished, when the studio then decided to jam the exorcism into it. Father Morning showing up at the Gemini Killer's cell just feels kind of random. Like, how did he get there? How did he even know to go there? How did he even know which cell the guy's in? There's one off-screen line that implies they have a history together, but I mean, that's not enough. You can't just throw a little ADR thing in there and problem solved. So the catalyst for this exorcism is messy, but the exorcism itself is great. And it does end up feeling like the right ending. Especially when you see the original ending and realize it was just pretty anticlimactic. Now that we've covered the studio interference and the messiness that arose from it, I want to cover all the stuff I love about the film because it far outweighs the bad. William Peter Blatty is a writer through and through. He didn't do much directing. In fact, he only directed one other film throughout his entire career. And he did that 10 years before tackling The Exorcist III. The Ninth Configuration was another adaptation of one of his novels, and it is absolutely a film worth watching, and one that I might cover on this channel at some point in the future. But that's a story for another time. Blatty is on record as saying that The Ninth Configuration is the true sequel to The Exorcist, rather than the much derided Exorcist II. It was actually almost made before The Exorcist, and again, William Friedkin was going to direct it, but it got shelved due to a lack of studio interest until The Exorcist proved massively successful. Then Blatty was able to end up making it himself. But don't let Blatty's short directorial resume trick you into thinking he isn't someone with serious chops behind the camera. Simply navigating the minefield of studio notes on this production is enough to make it clear that he's a talented director, but his talents go well beyond that. There's no shortage of style in The Exorcist III. There's such a great grasp of pacing and tone. For some people, The Exorcist III is gonna feel slow, maybe even uneventful, or God forbid, boring. But it's all about atmosphere and creeping dread. It's the kind of film where if you're not paying attention during it, then you're not gonna get much out of it. You can't be like on your phone while you're watching this movie. I mean, you really shouldn't do that with any movie, let's be honest. That means keep your eyes glued to the screen. There are certainly slow moments in the film, but it's all build-up, man, and the release of tension rivals anything horror cinema has to offer. The most famous moment from this film is definitely the hallway scare. I'm glad this expertly crafted scare gets the credit it deserves, but that leaves me extra perplexed as to why the rest of the film isn't held in that same high esteem. It's far from being the only great moment. But regardless, this hallway scare is a masterclass in crafting and releasing tension. It's not really possible to show this scare in video form because it's not confined to a short moment. The effectiveness of the scare comes from nearly 5 minutes worth of build-up. Blatty sticks us in this static wide shot and makes us wait it out, lingering and quiet. He even cuts away and then returns to it. It's a remarkable effect that he creates here. There's this edge-of-your-seat tension as we know something's going to happen in this shot. Otherwise, it wouldn't be lasting this long. We just don't know what or precisely when. When it finally does happen, the frightening visual is made even more effective through an excellent sound cue and a perfectly timed zoom that mirrors the viewer's shock. That zoom is like the camera's psychological equivalent to a gasp. And that zoom feels extra powerful, extra dynamic coming after so much stillness. Blatty displays such a command over the cinematic art form that it really is a shame that he didn't direct more films. But you can't blame him after this experience with the studio and the critical reception that all his hard work got. He approaches this film with a style all his own. His framing, editing, his mise-en-scène, it's all so distinctive. The percentage of shots with no human subject is much higher than your average film. He builds atmosphere and dread by focusing in on the details of the setting. This is one of the most restrained and understated horror films you will ever see. So much of this is left to your imagination, as Blatty, with an author's mindset, knows that what is imagined can often be far more disturbing than anything that is outright shown. When victims are brutally murdered, we don't see the act of the killing, or even the aftermath. Usually, we simply hear the details through vivid descriptions that allow our brains to fill in those details.
In place of his head was the head from a statue of Christ. All done up in blackface, like a minstrel show, you know. The eyes and the mouth painted white. Mr. Bones. The boy had been crucified on a pair of rowing oars.
It is certainly a case of breaking the show don't tell rule. I could see some people finding this overly dry or lacking punch, but it works remarkably well for me, and I would be surprised if most hardcore horror fans can't find something to appreciate in this level of patience and restraint. It's a testament to the power of imagination and suggestion over gratuity. There are a couple horror moments that might come off as a little goofier than intended, like the Jesus statue opening its eyes, or maybe the old woman crawling on the ceiling. I think this is an amusing image upon first glance, but the execution of it as it continues does manage to swing successfully back into creepy territory, I think. There are tiny cameos that aren't even really cameos from people like Fabio and a not yet famous Samuel L. Jackson, whose voice is actually dubbed over.
The living are dead.
And a bunch of basketball players. I mean, it's weird. But the actual main cast members are all excellent. George C. Scott is his usual classy-ass self, and he turns in a performance that goes far beyond what the role demanded. He brings both an intensity and a real vulnerability to this role that adds tangible depth to his character, and the relationship built up between him and Father Dyer. It does a great job of raising the stakes and hitting home after he's been murdered. But the show is thoroughly stolen by Brad Dourif as the evil spirit of the Gemini Killer. I can't believe I've gone this long without talking about Brad Dourif. I'm a little bit obsessed with the Gemini Killer. I mean, I even painted the fucking guy. Brad Dourif as the Gemini Killer is one of my all-time favorite performances. I love it. I find myself thinking about it just constantly. I've actually already talked about this role and this performance on this channel before, more than once.
The main thing is the torment of your friend, Father Karras, as he watches while I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent, his friends, and again, and on and on.
He is inside with us. He will never get away. His pain won't end.
Oh, gracious me. Was I raving?
I'm a big Brad Dourif fan, and this is such a great role for him. The range on display here is astounding. Within a single line, he will bounce from furious anger to amused provocations to ominous, understated warnings, and back to anger again. It's such a remarkable performance. It physically pains me that Brad Dourif doesn't get more respect. I mean, that could be a whole video in the series on its own. Brad Dourif deserves more respect. He really does. If I were in charge of the 1991 Academy Awards, I would have given the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor to Brad Dourif. I mean, sorry to whoever actually won that year, but you gotta turn your statue in. It's going to Brad Dourif. I mean, who actually won that year?
I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
Oh, fuck. It was Joe Pesci's year. God damn it, I can't take an Oscar away from Pesci.
Joe Pesci doesn't fuck around. Doesn't fuck around.
Even Dourif's performance wasn't exempt from studio interference. The way this shook out is a little complicated to unravel, but I'll take you through it. I think it actually ended up working out for the best, which was the result of studio meddling, but not in the way that the studio intended. Blatty had planned on just using Brad Dourif for the role, but the studio wanted Dourif gone, and they wanted Jason Miller to reprise his role as Damien Karras from the original film instead. Now that would have been awful, But the compromise that Blatty landed on is one that I think seriously elevates the film. Instead of one or the other, both actors now share the part. Damien Karras is the body for the evil spirit of James Veneman, aka the Gemini Killer. Jason Miller is the vessel, Brad Dourif is the demon. I think this is such an inventive way to portray a possession, or a take on a split personality. It's rumored that Jason Miller's faculties were severely hampered by alcoholism by this point, and that he couldn't remember any of the lengthy lines, and that's partially the reason behind the divided lines between him and Dourif. It's a credit to Blatty's ingenuity that he was able to take such unfavorable circumstances and such ridiculous demands from the studio and turn them into something that elevates the character and the film on both a thematic and a stylistic level. So impressive. There's no way for me to say this without it sounding like hyperbole, but I promise I'm not exaggerating when I say that the first appearance of Brad Dourif in this film is one of my favorite moments in all of cinema. I'm not exaggerating about that. I know you're gonna think I am, but I'm not. I love it.
Are they calling these Gemini killings in the papers? You must get them to do that, Lieutenant. It's important.
The Gemini is dead.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe! Look at me!
That zoom, oh my god, it's so great. I love how deep into the scene we get before he first shows up. The switch between the actors, the close-up on the eyes, the pullback as he shouts. Oh my god, it's indescribable how much I love the execution of this moment. It's just ingrained in my mind and I would watch it all day. Also, Dourif says Child's Play.
Child's Play, Lieutenant.
Just 2 years after voicing Chucky in the first Child's Play movie. The same year as the second Child's Play came out. There are also references to It's a Wonderful Life and, oddly enough, Spaceballs.
May the Schwartz be with you.
Go figure. The Exorcist III deserves so much more respect than it gets. Definitely one of my favorite horror movies.
A decapitated head can continue to see for approximately 20 seconds. So when I have one that's cocking, I always hold it up so that it can see its body. It's a little extra I throw in for no added charge.
I must admit it makes me chuckle every time. Life is fun.
It's a wonderful life, in fact. For some.
Do you love The Exorcist III as much as I do? I mean, I doubt it, but if you do, let me know in the comments. And subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. If you want to support me, I mean, I don't do merch or anything like that. I don't have a Patreon, but I do have a novel that you can pick up and read. It's a brutal post-apocalyptic tale of survival and revenge set in a freshly lawless New England. Link in the description if you want to grab yourself a copy. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. And guess what? This is just my voice. It's what I sound like. And if you can't handle it, then go away. No one's making you stay here. I'm not your keeper. Go live your life, little one. Be free. Okay. Bye.